right. You guys are live.
Yeah. Good. All right. Hey guys, thanks for joining us today. Andy and I are here and we're going to talk a little bit about taking care of you and self-care. I'm sure we can all relate to the feelings that we have of just pure exhaustion when you feel like you have nothing left to give to your spouse, to your children, to your friends, to your family. And today we're just going to take some time to discuss the importance of prioritizing self-care. It doesn't matter what stage of life you're in, self-care is definitely super important for each of us. By the way, if we've never met before, I'm Jessica Benninghoff. I'm the director of the Special Needs Ministry here at Hope. I have the privilege of leading the Special Needs Ministry team here. And joining me is Andy Beaver. She is a parent and one of our amazing volunteers. And I'm just super thankful to have her here. Andy, why don't you take a minute just to share with everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Andy. I'm a Michigander turned transplant into the South. My husband, Matt, and I grew up in Michigan all our lives. We met in college and got married soon after graduation. We've been married for almost 15 years. We've lived here in North Carolina for the last 6 years, and then before that in Northern Virginia about 6, and then the first few years in Michigan of our marriage. We have 2 super spunky girls. Ellie's 7 and Addie's 4. Ellie also happens to have Down syndrome. I'm currently a stay-at-home mom, but before that, I was a special education teacher for about 10 years. We just really love family adventures, and you can often find us hiking, biking, hanging out, watching movies, just hanging together.
I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So if you are joining us today live and or watching the rebroadcast, please hit the like button or the love button. If you can hear us, hit the wow face. I don't even know what that is. I'm not a Facebook guru, but go ahead and hit that. We'd love to know who's listening in with us.
Yeah, and if you have comments or questions during our time together today, make sure that you leave those comments down below. We'd love to know where you're watching from. So we've got a question for you, first of all. So if you're watching with us live or even in the rebroadcast, go ahead and comment below. What do you currently do for self-care? When you think about self-care, what does that look like for you, and what are some things that you do? We'd love to hear what you do to take care of yourself.
Yeah, so go ahead and comment below, and at the end of our time together, we will be having a giveaway. We're going to be giving away a lovely $10 Starbucks gift card. So go ahead and comment for a chance to win later on.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and get into kind of our topic for today. I know that as we research just kind of the topic of self-care, there's lots of information out there about what self-care is. And we're going to actually share some information today that Andy came across from a specific podcast. Why don't you just share a little bit with everyone about that podcast?
Sure. The podcast name is The Real Life Podcast with Jeff and Alyssa Bethke. And they are married. They have 3 kids. They live in Maui. And they host this podcast, giving an episode to the internet every Tuesday. And they just focus their episodes on faith, family, culture, Jesus. And this episode was posted about 6 months ago, and it's called Where Self-Care Becomes a Counterfeit. So you can find it on all major podcast apps, iTunes, Spotify. I use Podcast Addict, and I'm sure it's everywhere else. But their mission as a whole is just to encourage men, women, and families through online experiences and creative resources that are practical, fun, and helpful for each person on their journey to following Jesus.
So today we're just going to kind of hit on a couple of key points from that podcast, but we definitely encourage you to go back and take a listen to the entire podcast. So self-care, it's kind of become a popular buzzword, and it's something that you can't kind of go throughout your day without hearing about or seeing about when you turn on the TV or scroll through social media. But lots of times when we hear about self-care, it actually has to do with self-indulgent behavior and not things that really can provide you with any sort of rest. And as followers of Jesus, we know that sometimes those things that we spend our money on, and when we think of consumerism, none of that can really sustain us through life. So Andy, can you just maybe share a little bit about, we're coming off a spring break, and we've seen lots of families on lots of trips and doing lots of fun things. And while that's great, for everyone, that actual type of vacation and break might not actually be good for self-care.
Right. So kind of 2 pieces that can be pitfalls for some, but not all, or is that definition that culture gives us that self-care is consumerism, that we have to go buy things in order to have that self-care. And while that may be self-care for some people, it's definitely not for all people. We do need to be really sensitive to the fact that even though our culture says that's what self-care is, that is not achievable for the majority of population. And so that doesn't mean that if you do have the means, you can't use the power of currency and money to go buy yourself some space and energy or tools so you can care for yourself. But that definition that culture gives us is not the only way to get self-care.
Right, so if you go on a trip for spring break and you come back and you find yourself incredibly exhausted and not rejuvenated, that's probably not what you need to do for self-care for yourself.
Right, but it might be what I need.
Absolutely. We need different things, and that's okay.
Also, that the consumerism idea of self-care that our culture gives us takes that introspective piece out of the self-awareness of looking inside ourselves and really figuring out what our hearts need, what brings us great joy, what truly gives us the care and the rest that we actually need. And like you said earlier, as followers of Jesus, we need to look past those ideas of consumerism in self-care that are hiding, and that we really need to refocus our thoughts to evaluate where we actually are. And sometimes that's going to mean a bigger fight against what culture is saying self-care is versus what we actually need.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, what I need for self-care and what you need for self-care might not be the same thing, and that's okay. I know at the end of the day, when I have had a crazy day, I might be overwhelmed at home or overwhelmed at work. I really find myself just kind of needing to escape and needing a break. And I find myself scrolling aimlessly through social media. I'm sure some of you can relate to that as well too. And sure, this gives me a mental break, but I promise you it really does nothing at all to rejuvenate my soul. And so this numbing out and escaping the stress of our life is referred to escapism. So do you want to share just a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, let's face it, regardless of our kids' gifts, abilities, we all feel irritated, frustrated, bored, tired. We get stuck in the comparison trap. But the numbing out and avoiding and escaping probably don't actually have anything to do with what your heart actually needs to rejuvenate and recharge yourself. We just buy into that idea, and I'm guilty of this as well, that escaping for a while is just going to give us the energy that we need to continue doing the things that really matter. And this is hard because it can be super subtle, and it can be things that we really like to do. It can be things that are fun and good, but ultimately they don't bring us closer to Jesus and and what he wants for our lives. And he wants us to be living abundantly, and when we avoid and just stuff all the uncomfortableness that comes along with feeling tired mostly and irritated and frustrated, we're not really living a life like we should be. So instead of turning to God in those hard times, we often turn to outside influences, like scrolling social media, grabbing a bowl of ice cream every night, and mindlessly watching TV. And I'm definitely guilty of all those things. It's easier to escape than it is, I think, to reflect on what really matters.
Yeah, and I think the biggest point there too is those things are not inherently bad. They're not inherently negative, but if they're not doing things to rejuvenate us and to rejuvenate our soul, they're not really a form of self-care.
Right.
So, I mean, this week, the more I've thought about this podcast and just kind of researching and the stuff you've shared with me, the more I've come to realize that the things I think I'm doing to rejuvenate my soul and for self-care, they're not that. Those things are not from the Lord, and they're not really what he wants to do. He wants me to do, to find rest and to find peace and to find joy. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that at all. But I know you have really some practical, simple ways that we can help shift our focus when we start thinking through self-care. Why don't you share that with everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think at first we really need to just be aware of where we are turning to in hard times, and just evaluate what actually gives us peace and rest, and know what fills us up. And this may take time and energy, and like we said earlier, it may not be the same for you as it is for me or anybody else, but I think it's very important to figure out where your space is and where where we have room to breathe. And if you don't have that room to breathe, then I think too, like, it's super important to go ask for help and figure it out,
Yep.
you know, because we need to be going to the Lord.
Yeah.
One activity that they had talked about in the podcast that we thought was really cool was making a list. And it sounds super simple. You just make a list of 5 things that fill you up and then 5 things that drain you. And they're little things. Don't overthink this. Super simple. Like for me, maybe it's good coffee, going for a walk, chatting with friends, being in community, listening to a podcast, reading a book. Super simple. Versus some other things like the scrolling social media or comparing myself to others or overscheduling. Yeah, that's a big one for me. And this is an activity that probably you need to do maybe even quarterly because life changes. It's always kind of moving.
Some of the things that fill you up today may not fill you up 3 months from now, or you might have different things that drain you,
Right.
this time next year.
Right.
And it's important to constantly be evaluating that.
Yeah. And then when you have your list, to look at it. And then as simple as it sounds, do more of the things that fill you up and less of the things that drain you. And it does sound simple, and for some people maybe it is simple, but it also is probably going to challenge you into taking some time and energy into making changes that you need to make in order to make sure that you are constantly being filled up and not constantly draining yourself.
Because I think if we're not careful, a lot of times we spend so much time doing the things that drain us and we're not even aware of it. And we're not spending any time doing the things that recharge us. I know you shared just a story about how you kind of, sometimes those things that fill us up may not be things that we prefer to do, and they may be actually hard to do. And I know you have a little story there, so go ahead and share that with everyone.
So a little over a year ago, I had to make a big change in my life, just like a daily habit. One thing you need to know is that I really love to sleep. Like I could fall asleep anywhere. And my girls don't like to sleep. They like to get up before the sun. And, about a year ago, I found myself really frustrated and quite irritated that they were waking me up every day. And as ridiculous as that sounds, that was the reality in my house. Like I was already drained before my feet even hit the floor every morning. And I got to a point where I didn't like how the mornings were going. I didn't like how I was feeling. I didn't like the mom that I was. And so I knew I needed to change. And I kept telling myself, but I need this sleep like to function, when in reality I needed space and room to breathe. I needed rest in self-care in other ways, and for me that was setting my alarm and making sure my husband would wake me up earlier than when the girls got up, and that means 5 o'clock in my house, and it was a really hard change, but even to this day, I mean, it's not perfect. There are many days I choose to sleep and then suffer consequences later. But it really set the tone for us, and I can tell now the difference in choosing to wake up and sacrifice that time of sleep that I'm telling myself I absolutely need has been a huge change in my life, and in just giving me time to read a devotion, read my Bible, pray for a minute, maybe just sit and drink a cup of coffee before all the demands were put on me. And some days it's 2 minutes, some days it's none. They beat me up, and Doc McStuffins is on in the background, and we shuffle through.
Absolutely. I mean, and let's face it, no one wants to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, but if it's what you have to do, then it's what you have to do for yourself. So guys, just to recap, it sounds super simple, but take some time, make a list of those 5 things that really fill you up and those 5 things that drain you, and then be intentional with your time. And you want to find time within the normal rhythms of your day to be doing those things that fill you up more than those things that are currently draining you. Okay, I think it's time for our giveaway. So we have this $10 Starbucks card here, and we are going to give this to, what do you think, Jay?
June West Toll.
June Toll. Yay, June. June, we'll have this for you at the Apex campus on Sunday. Thanks for being here with us. Okay, go ahead.
Oh yeah, we're right. So this is just one of the many ParentHub Live events. So be sure to comment below if you have topics that you want covered that would be of interest to you, because there are future ParentHub Live segments coming.
Yeah. So every week a different, every 2 weeks, every week. 2 weeks. Sorry, y'all. It's so new. Every 2 weeks, a different area of family ministry is going to be doing this quick podcast, just sharing things with parents across family ministry, just topics for parents, topics to help us all to get better. But before we wrap up today, I want to be sure just to make some quick, simple announcements. First, for Kid City, this past weekend at Easter, we had 54 kids decided to make Jesus their friend and their Savior, and that's super exciting. We really want to celebrate that, and we're so thankful for the parents of these kids who lead the way for these important conversations. If you have a child that's talking about next steps like baptism, or if you would just like to know more, there are growing up classes that will be May 4th and May 5th, so go ahead and head over to the Hope website under classes to find out more information. Announcement for night at the Raleigh campus. So we invite families that are impacted by special needs to join us at 7. The topic this month is actually grief. And Andy will be leading that here at the Raleigh campus. I told you she's like super volunteer. MSM Color Wars is next Tuesday, the 30th of April. Parents are encouraged to attend and participate with their students. Lastly, HSM 24 is the weekend of May 3rd and 4th. If you have a student that's willing to take that risk and be there with us, then we're going to guarantee that they're going to have a great time. So if you have high school students, and join them or encourage them just to be a part of that. But we thank you guys for joining us today. We hope just a little bit of what we shared was helpful to you, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.